Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to part one of a three-part series on the American Job Center, also known as AJC Certification and Section 188, a window of opportunity to impact equal opportunity policy and practice for people with disabilities. This series is really a collaborative effort and certainly a labor of love between two National Technical Assistance Centers, LEAD and DEI, who you will learn a little bit more about in just a minute. I am Laura Glenick. I am the project manager for the DEI Technical Assistance Team, which is a collaboration between the National Disability Institute and its for-profit arm, NDI Consulting, and I'm really excited to be serving as the facilitator for today's presentation. So before we begin, I want to go over some logistics regarding this webinar platform. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer, so please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel, and you can see an example of what that looks like on this slide. And if you accidentally close the panel, you can easily reopen by going to the Communicate menu, which you will see at the top of the screen, and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or you prefer to listen by phone, you can dial the numbers you see on your screen, and I will provide you with them. The toll-free number is 1-855-749-4750. The meeting code that you will enter will be 660-371-294, and when it asks for an attendee ID, you do not have to enter one, just press the pound sign. Real-time captioning is being provided, and the captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right corner of the webinar platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize the other panels above it, like the chat, Q&A, and or the participants. So we really do want to hear from you today. Throughout this webinar, please use the chat box or the Q&A box to send any questions you have to the host and presenters, and we will direct the questions accordingly during the question and answer session at the end. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may also ask questions by emailing them to my colleague around the day. Her email address is aawosika@ndi-inc.org. This webinar is being recorded, and the materials will be placed on the LEAD Center website along with the webinar archive shortly after the webinar ends. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to the host around the day, or you may also email her, and I'll provide her email address again, aawosika@ndi-inc.org. Excuse me. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our two guest presenters today. As you will note, they bring background and expertise from the local, state, and national levels of workforce. Our first presenter is Janie Robinson. She is representing the LEAD Center. Janie provides technical assistance to the National Workforce System on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act's Equal Opportunity and Non-Discrimination provisions as part of the LEAD Center. She served on the technical assistance team at National Disability Institute under multiple disability employment initiatives for the United States Department of Labor. And then prior to this, Janie was a disability navigator under the U.S. Department of Labor's Disability Program Navigator Initiative. She served in Massachusetts in the One-Stop Career Centers. She is also a certified benefit specialist for an independent living center. And as a member of the deaf community, Janie is fluent in American Sign Language and leads efforts to expand communication access nationwide. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the LEAD Center, which is one of the technical assistance centers collaborating on today's webinar. The LEAD Center, or as it is known, the National Center on Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities, is a collaborative of disability, workforce, and economic empowerment organizations. It's led by the National Institute with funding from the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. The mission of the LEAD Center is to advance sustainable individual systems-level change that results in improved, competitive, integrated employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for individuals across the spectrum of disability. And joining Janie today is our second presenter, Brian Ingram. He is representing the Disability Employment Initiative. For the past 8 years, Brian has been part of the DEI Technical Assistance Team, which is contracted by the U.S. Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration to provide information, training, and technical assistance to the Disability Employment Initiative. Prior to this, he served as both a disability navigator and as a state lead in Oregon under the Disability Program Navigator Initiative. Brian has extensive experience with Title I providers at the state, local, and center levels, focusing on access for job seekers with disabilities. And here's a little bit more information about the Disability Employment Initiative. The goal of the DEI is to expand the capacity of American job centers to improve education, training, and employment outcomes of individuals with disabilities through a career pathways framework in support of WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and DEI is administered by the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration and jointly funded with the Office of Disability Employment Policy. So before we turn the presentation over to Janie, I'd like to invite Christopher Button, who is the Supervisor of Workforce Systems Policy with the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, to give a welcome. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. We're here at ODEP all listening and very excited about the launch of this three-part webinar series. We really appreciate and have, I think, grown in our appreciation of our understanding of how important Section 188 and the non-discrimination and equal opportunity requirements of the WIOA are are for people with disabilities. So important and really key to making sure that the vision of the American Job Centers and of the WIOA system across the nation can in fact provide meaningful and effective services to people with disabilities. So this webinar series is really an important collaboration between ODEP's LEAD Center and ETA's DEI National TA, as Laura described to everyone. This is a really powerful partnership because these two centers are doing just amazing things with the Workforce Center system across the nation. So I don't want to take time away from the webinar. I just want to say how excited we are here at Labor that this collaboration is happening and that it's happening around Section 188, which is just really important for all aspects of WIOA implementation. And I think that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. So Laura, thanks very much. Welcome to everyone. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Chris. And now, Jamie, I'm going to, I believe you have the ball. I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
I do. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Chris, and the whole ODEP team, ETA, and also the Civil Rights Center for, your tremendous guidance and support in all of this work that we're talking about today. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this next hour. We thought we'd start out by giving a little background on how LEAD and DEI, Brian and myself, kind of got here to this point today. What we've learned from so many of you in the field at state and local levels, and we're excited to kind of bring this discussion to the forefront around this really important connection between Section 188 and AJC certification. So both LEAD and DEI have been engaged in WIOA implementation in states across the country from policy to practice. And as a part of LEAD, I have had the opportunity over the past several years to work with state equal opportunity officers and very closely with several states too that you'll hear from in part 2. And this work has led to experiencing firsthand the impact of partnerships in applying Section 188 as the framework to equal opportunity and accessibility in the workforce system, as well as a part of the AJC certification process. And these are partnerships that we have seen and been involved in between equal opportunity officers and vocational rehabilitation. They are relationships between really diverse cross-partner systems, between policy administrators, WIOA policy administrators, and program implementers, and then also in collaboration with the Disability Employment Initiative. So Brian, I want to give you a chance to kind of share a little bit about how DEI collided with some of this work around 188 that we're doing with LEAD. And it looks like you're still on mute. There you go.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, excellent. So thanks, Jamie. And really quickly, thanks to everyone for being here, the LEAD Center and the DEI for facilitating our training today, and of course ODEP and ETA for supporting this work. And to answer your question, Jamie, I'd like to say that in my role as a technical assistance liaison to the DEI initiative, I have been working closely with Title I providers in many places at the state, regional, and local levels. And a few states asked for my assistance while they began to consider how to operationalize their WIOA state plans. And one state in particular, Virginia, which is one of the examples we're going to look at in part 2, invited me to assist around their Section 188 certification. And I'm not ashamed to say I was pretty flattered by the invitation. And you can imagine my surprise when I called in for my very first meeting and discovered that my colleague from NDI, you, Jamie, was a founding member of the team. But seriously, as we hope the states develop their compliance strategy, Jamie and I realized that the things we were seeing and the lessons we were learning in the field were things that many states were considering, and so they were important to the implementation of WIOA everywhere. And so we decided, with the help of some of the states we've been working with, to develop and present this training series together as a joint lead DEI effort. You know what, Jamie? Maybe I should stop talking about the training so we can start giving it. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, Brian. Great. Great. So what Brian and I have learned in kind of many of these experiences that we've had together and through all of these different partnerships is that Section 188 and the AJC certification together offer a really incredible window of opportunity to evaluate and really look closely at accessibility, to survey staff, partner, customer awareness on these policies and procedures, educate on effective strategies, and basically open up the pathways to employment for people with disabilities. And so we know that all core partners now share some aspects of AJC service delivery, and that really means having some level of awareness of Section 188 as well. We know that 188, which is aligned with the Americans with Disabilities Act, provides that foundation to the AJC certification. We know that equal opportunity officers are charged with implementing 188 compliance, and that vocational rehabilitation is WIOA's subject matter expert in disability and accessibility. It's a partner that is right there wanting to work with other partners under WIOA. And we also know that the AJCs and partners are in need of resources and strategies to implement both. I regularly have the opportunity to interact with workforce development boards, one-stop operators, equal opportunity officers, voc rehab, DEI, and often we're talking about action planning in all of these areas. How can we move from policy to operationalizing these? And what are the action steps that we can take? And we're going to be talking a lot about that during this series. And so here are kind of the overall objectives for all three parts of the series: to increase knowledge of WIOA disability-related provisions, Section 188 and AJC certification, to clarify strategies that expand programmatic accessibility. We will touch on physical, but we really want to hone in on programmatic accessibility in both 188 compliance and AJC certification, to identify the need to update state and local Section 188 compliance procedures and AJC certification processes as well to reflect that expanded role of core partners under WIOA, to learn replicable strategies and action steps from states, multiple states, to operationalize effective certification processes with Section 188 as the framework, and that is part 2. If you're not registered yet, we're going to hear from 3 different states and multiple perspectives in each state, from policy to practice. And then finally, to identify cross-system partners to engage in Section 188 and AJC certification. Key partners that we know, that we've experienced: equal opportunity officers and vocational rehabilitation. And with that, Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick off the part 1 of the series.
Okay, well, thank you for the series overview, Jamie. And let's consider the task at hand this afternoon, which is our webinar part 1, WIOA from a disability perspective and Section 188, a powerful foundation for access. Part 1, what's in it for you, listener? That's a fair question. Well, in this session, we're going to provide you with foundational information and cross-referencing between WIOA, disability, Section 188, and AJC certification and access, which Jamie was touching on. We're also going to describe the need and consider how to develop shared definitions of access across core WIOA partners that can ensure both physical and programmatic access and include effective communication access to WIOA services. We're going to suggest strategies for cross-partner and cross-systems discussions of comprehensive Section 188 compliance procedures. And we're going to argue the need for updating Section 188 AJC certification processes to reflect the expanded role of the AJC under WIOA. So that's not a bad deal for an hour or so of your time, right? Well, it'll be just about an hour if I can keep the ball moving. So let's look at the next slide. Okay. Now let me begin by saying that the implementation of WIOA creates a new service delivery environment for the 4 core partners covered under the legislation, especially when it comes to access for job seekers with disability. And those of you who know me know I say this a lot. And I'm not going to promise and I'm not going to say it a lot during this training. So for everyone's sake, I think an explanation of why I think it does might be in order. So let's look at this. There are 4 titles included under WIOA, as opposed to 2 under WIA. Each state's required to develop a 4-year plan that includes and coordinates all 4 titles. WIOA requires establishment of a common performance accountability system for the core 4 programs. WIOA streamlines and strengthens strategic roles of state and local workforce boards. WIOA necessitates development of integrated intake, case management, and reporting systems. WIOA extends state-established certifications for one-stops to include all 4 titles. So taken together, what does this mean? The WIOA calls for cross-partner and cross-demographic collaboration to ensure cross-systems access. In order to provide this level of access to customers of all demographics, definitions, messaging, and ideally procedural consistency across all of the services included under WIOA should be the goal. This is why we suggest that the certification process used under WIA will ultimately fall short of the mark defined by WIOA, and that there's a need for WIOA partners to develop a process that reflects this new service delivery environment. So, that being said, who are these partners we're talking about? Well, let's look at the next slide. This slide's pretty self-explanatory, but to summarize, the 4 core partners identified in the WIOA legislation are tasked with providing coordinated comprehensive services, and these partners are, everyone together, Title I, Adult and Dislocated Worker and Youth Formula Programs, which are administered by Department of Labor. Title II, Adult Education and Literacy Programs administered by the Department of Education. Title III, Wagner-Pizer Employment Service Programs administered by Department of Labor. And Title IV, programs under Title I of the Rehabilitation Act as amended by WIOA Title I that provide services to individuals with disabilities and administered by the Department of Education. Now, this may seem obvious to many of you, but just in case it doesn't, the inclusions of Titles II and IV, Education and Vocational Rehabilitation, are part of what differentiates WIOA from the WIA legislation that preceded it. Under WIA, only Titles I and III were included. I mention this because it's going to come into play later, so stay tuned. Now, to sum up, when you hear Jamie and I referring to the core partners, these are the providers we mean. Got it? Good. One of our basic parameters has been defined. Now, let's look at another, disability. Let's consider what WIOA says on this important topic by reviewing the next slide. So, here's a list of things that WIOA states about disability specifically, and they're pretty substantial, especially when considered as a group like this. So you need a plan for serving job seekers with disabilities, and it must be included as part of both state and local plans. Now, WIOA performance measures will include specific reports on customers with disabilities. In fact, WIOA asks us to document disaggregated data around disability. This data will highlight disability outcomes, and this could place much more of an emphasis on tracking disclosure and access than we ever saw under WIA. Now, the third bullet is very critical to our presentation today, so I'm going to read it for you. Criteria for certifying one-stops must include assessing physical and programmatic accessibility, including effective communication of facilities, programs, services, technology, and materials, and appropriate staff training. Now, please keep this in mind as I turn the next slide over to Jamie, and she talks specifically about Section 188. Jamie, are you ready?
Yes. Yes, Brian, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Here, I'll advance. Oh, you got it.
I got it, thank you. So just to kind of get everybody on the same page, Section 188 implements the non-discrimination and equal opportunity provisions of WIOA, which are contained in the 188 of the statute. And it covers a lot more than disability. It prohibits discrimination on the grounds of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, political affiliation, or belief, amongst many other bases. It also requires that reasonable accommodations be provided to qualified individuals with disabilities. And we're going to spend a little bit more time later on reasonable accommodations because it's pretty central to programmatic access. Section 188 contains provisions identical to those in 188 of WIA, and here you can find the regulations at 29 CFR Part 38. So who does Section 188 apply to? Well, any entity to which financial assistance under WIOA Title I is extended, and that includes state-level agencies that administer or are financed by WIOA Title I funds, state employment security agencies, state and local workforce development boards, one-stop operators, service providers, including eligible training providers, on-the-job OJT training from employers, Job Corps, and a big one at the end there, all programs and activities that are part of the one-stop delivery system that are operated by one-stop partners, which is pretty all-encompassing. And I bolded the service providers because I think it's a good example of how some states are taking a more proactive stance on their policy messaging and procedure messaging across core partners, but also with their training providers. And Virginia will talk about this a little more in Part 2 on how they developed universal language that includes Section 188 and ADA across their programs, as well as with all contracts with service providers to really try to ensure equal opportunity and accessibility, and that's being made as a priority. And so this definition of disability probably looks very familiar to most of us. Section 188, the final rule, which was effective in the early part of 2017, brings the regulations in accord with ADA amendments of 2008. It's the same definition. So it says a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. And substantially limits is not meant to be a demanding standard. And this is important because the final rule's definition of disability is meant to be interpreted broadly to enable more people with disabilities to be served in the workforce system. So if someone discloses a medical condition or a disability, the AJC program should consider the person has a disability, and also whether the person is making a request for an accommodation at that point. And so disclosure is not meant to kind of set off an exhaustive, analysis of does the person have the disability or not, but really kind of should start to flag, are there any supports that this customer might need to move through this customer flow? Maybe explore accommodations, explore partnerships, resources to bring to the table to support employment goals. And so with respect to employment, we're talking about a qualified individual with disability. Here you have the definition that this is an individual who satisfies the requisite skill, experience, education, other job-related requirements of that position, and who, with or without a reasonable accommodation, can perform the essential functions of that job. And with respect to aid, benefits, services, or training, an individual who, with or without auxiliary aids or services, reasonable accommodations, or modifications in policies, practices, procedures, meets that essential eligibility requirements for the service or the training. And this is kind of where the workforce system, in the workforce system, we really want to stay clear of steering people with disabilities away or to jobs based on the disability, or maybe just a lack of understanding around the options for reasonable accommodations or modifications. And this is a big area we're seeing more under WIOA, where vocational rehabilitation or other disability partners are offering a lot more support and technical assistance to one-stops in terms of, how do we talk to employers, or when do we not talk to employers about applicants with disabilities, or maybe even how do we work with customers with disabilities on making those decisions around disclosure and need for accommodations. So again, probably all of us here are familiar with this term, reasonable accommodation, and it really means modification or adjustment so that an individual with a disability can participate and benefit from all of those services all along that customer flow of a workforce system in reaching their goal. And so what I often experience in the field is that the workforce systems are familiar and have a policy in place with reasonable accommodations, but rarely are there kind of clear processes in place where staff and partners are regularly engaged in and it's part of their culture. And this is kind of a central component of programmatic access, to take a look at what's involved in an interactive reasonable accommodation process. And it really starts with recognizing requests. Anytime a person indicates that he or she is having a problem or a challenge related to a disability or medical condition, it's not often that people come in and say, I have a disability and I need this exact accommodation. I mean, sometimes that happens, but I wouldn't say often. And so we need to start to become a little bit more familiar with what are the different ways that people are relaying disabilities and talking about disabilities. And when they do, we need to start to consider, is this individual making a request for an accommodation? And do we need to kind of gather more information, work with the customer on their really primary preferences, explore options, have resources like Job Accommodation Network and so many other resources that do exist, so that, that can move forward and accommodation can be implemented. So what becomes really paramount around this topic is to really know, how is your reasonable accommodation operationalized? How does it work? And is it effective? And so this is another area really central to assessing programmatic access for both 188 and AJC certification. Understanding and knowing, what does disability discrimination look like? It is denying an individual with a disability the opportunity to participate in or benefit from an aid, benefit, service, or training. It's providing a qualified individual with a disability with an aid, benefit, service, or training that's not equal to what's being offered to everybody else or isn't as effective. It's requiring an individual with a disability to participate in a separate or a different program or activities instead of the mainstream program and activities of the Workforce Center. And that would be your automatic referral to VR right there. That a lot of states are taking a good look at of how do we tackle that. It's not as easy as a checklist. It's about not administering programs and activities in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of individuals with disabilities, and it's about not providing meaningful opportunities for seeking employment and work in competitive integrated settings. So these are just tougher areas to evaluate and take into account what is the overall culture of the one-stop. I mean, these things do happen, and they can be a result of lack of awareness, attitudinal barriers, and it could be difficult to survey these types of things with only a checklist or only a posting of a policy. You know, they can be layered, and you know, we are seeing states now begin to address these things through scenario-based training that's relevant to the one-stop process and environment. And we're also seeing states surveying every perspective in the workforce system, not just the leadership, but also the staff, the partners, the customers. And we're also seeing cross-partner work, where workforce and disability partners are creating opportunities to come together on a regular basis and brainstorm solutions together. And we'll hear firsthand from states more about that. Brian, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Jamie. And, you know, we're really starting to get to the heart of the matter now, which I find very interesting and exciting. And I'd like to start this section by saying, when you put the new service delivery environment created by WIOA together with the Section 188 certification of the AJCs, what do you get? Well, what we'd like to suggest is that you get a window of opportunity. And I think the next slide makes that pretty clear. The reason we feel this could be such an opportunity for WIOA partners and the job seekers they serve is that under WIOA, all core partners share some responsibilities when it comes to center administration. And one of these is developing an AJC certification process. Now, one of the certification requirements under WIOA is Section 188 compliance, right? And as Jamie so clearly explained in the last section, this compliance is defined by access, physical access and programmatic access, which includes effective communication with all job seekers. Come to think of it, I think that to really appreciate the opportunity that we're both so excited about, we need to look a little bit more closely at these two types of access that Jamie introduced and defined by Section 188. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, physical access. Fairly straightforward idea, right? A job seeker needs to be able to access the AJC, the facilities and spaces involved in the delivery of the services provided there. Physical access includes things like ramps, designated parking spaces, automatic doors, accessible workstations, bathrooms, and areas and spaces where services like workshops and meetings are conducted. This type of access is hugely important, right? If a customer can't physically access the center, it makes accessing the services delivered there significantly more challenging to access. And it's also pretty concrete. I mean, a job center is either physically accessible or it's not. Measurements can be taken. Equipment can be installed. Spaces can be altered to ensure that access is possible. And if administrators aren't clear on what needs to be in place to ensure physical accessibility, there's many trusted sources in the provider community for them to consult with, a few of which we've listed above. So let's review some physical access strategies. These are strategies for ensuring physical accessibility, and they should be driven by center and regional leadership and could benefit from the inclusion of ADA subject matter experts, many of which, as we mentioned in the previous slide, can be accessed in the provider community. Standards should be developed by leadership and should be consistent from location to location. Guidance from leadership is also very helpful to ensure compliance both in the assessment process and in helping the sites remedy any areas of non-compliance that are uncovered by it. Now, ensuring physical accessibility isn't always easy to do. I can tell you from my own personal experience that many structures, especially older ones, are often very far from this ideal, and they require a lot of resources and attention to comply with Section 188. But it is pretty concrete. It can often be measured with a ruler, and there's something deeply comforting about checking boxes on a checklist, right? So let's compare this with the second type of accessibility that's defined by Section 188, the programmatic. Because in my experience, this type of access can be a little bit more challenging to measure, as Jamie was saying. Okay, before programmatic accessibility can be measured, it's got to be defined. So let's look at the definition that WIOA provides. So WIOA states that programmatic accessibility must be assessed. Okay, fair enough. But what does this mean? I mean, it's a different term than program accessibility as defined in the ADA Title II, but that definition does include programs and services. So how is the WIOA definition more encompassing than that? Well, let's look. It says here that it means that policies, practices, and procedures must provide effective and meaningful opportunity for persons with disabilities to participate in or benefit from aid, benefits, services, and training. So let's unpack that a little bit more on the next slide. So programmatically accessible means providing reasonable accommodations. Okay, I mean, I don't know about you, but I assumed reasonable accommodation would be a part of this. But look at the next bullet. Reasonable accommodations to policies, practices, and procedures. Now that's very direct and encompassing. This is particularly important because I can tell you again from my own personal experience that a well-written, well-intended policy focused on ensuring or increasing access can be easily undone by practices or procedures that don't effectively support it. What about the next one? Administering programs in the most integrated setting possible. Jamie mentioned this as well, and this statement is very impactful. The most integrated setting appropriate implies that the assumption while serving job seekers with disabilities is that you should offer them the same options and services you offer to every customer, that the usual customer flow is the best way to serve a customer, even if procedures and practices might need to be modified in order to do it. This also means that a referral to another program should not mean a referral away from your own. And then, communicating with individuals with disabilities as effectively as with others. That's a very high bar. That's a very big kettle of fish, so to speak. It's so big, in fact, that Jamie's going to spend some more time on it a little bit later. And finally, there is that statement again, equal opportunity to participate and enjoy the benefits of the program or activity. It's an important message, and I'd like to make a suggestion about it on the next slide. Here's my suggestion. I would suggest that when the benefits of a program or activity is mentioned in this context, you should ask yourself, what is the primary benefit of the service? It's the outcome, right? In the case of WIOA services, the outcomes are training, placement, and retention. The overarching goal of equal access is that all individuals benefit equally from the full spectrum of services available in the one-stop center and ultimately have an equal opportunity to access the employment and training outcomes associated with all the services provided there. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Whew. I always like, my heart skips a beat when I read that. Now, on the last slide, I mentioned that programmatic access includes effective communication with all job seekers, and that's what Jamie's going to talk about now. Jamie, you want to take it away?
Okay, thanks, Brian. Great. So under Section 188 and the ADA, all state and local governments are required to take steps to ensure that communication, which is speaking, listening, reading, writing, with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or with other disabilities are as effective as communication with others. And other disabilities could include people who are blind, visually impaired, have developmental or speech disabilities, even people with physical disabilities. Really anyone who may use auxiliary aids or devices or even just different types of strategies to augment communication. And it's required except when it would fundamentally alter the nature of the service or program or would result in an undue financial and administrative burden. And under WIOA Section 188, it is considered pretty difficult to prove undue burden, and especially when ensuring effective communication. And you can see there one of the top issues that comes up around paying for sign language interpreters. Okay. So how do you assess effective communication? Well, it's a part of programmatic access. It's actually included in programmatic access. So it will likely take more than checking off the box for, we have a TTY. And while I realize that's still a part of a lot of the regulations out there in the states, it may not be the most effective because most people in the deaf and hard of hearing community don't use TTYs anymore. They use their cell phones to text, to Skype, they use video relay. You may have talked with somebody over video relay and not even realized it because they're talking through an interpreter. And this can actually save resources for interpreters that can be used for more appropriate circumstances like assessments or training or credentialing or job interviews. So assessing effective communication will likely involve, again, looking at your reasonable accommodation policies and procedures and building your staff knowledge around what does it mean when we have on all of our forms and resources in the One Stop, we provide auxiliary aids upon request. What does that mean? And so some examples of ways where you can kind of really learn about what your workforce staff and partner experiences are with deaf and hard of hearing customers or with other disabilities. You could ask about their knowledge of, which situations are okay for writing notes or texting with customers, and when should we be hiring interpreters? Do we know how to find and secure qualified sign language interpreters? Do we understand and use video relay? Very easy, simple, real-time, free. Do we have use of video remote interpreting? I know there's a shortage of interpreters nationwide right now. It's a big problem. And so are some regions looking into video remote interpreting for those assessments, for the job interviews, for, all different types of more intensive communication situations? And do you have closed captioning on your videos? That anything you use within your centers and your workshops. And so here are some more strategies that workforce leadership may employ to really start to address effective communication. And it starts by partnering with deaf and hard of hearing agencies and other diverse disability partners. And this is going to be a theme in the whole series here. But it's really important to be able to leverage their expertise, right? We don't want workforce boards and one-stop operators to think that you have to know how all of this works and about all of the different reasonable accommodations that exist. That would be really difficult. And so it's about partnership and looking at together your policies and procedures around communication access, looking at your assistive technology. Does staff have knowledge of it, and is it being used? Why or why not? Asking one-stop center staff and partners, what are your experiences like? Typically, because I talk about my background and working in the deaf community, lots of people will come up to me and tell me about their experiences and the challenges in working with customers with different communication needs. Ask your deaf and hard of hearing partners, what are your experiences and your customers' experiences using the workforce system? You'll get another whole other side of that perspective. And then use all of that information to drive your training needs on the state and the local level around effective communication. So we're coming back to this kind of overarching programmatic access and how can workforce systems improve it in a meaningful way that impacts accessibility. And ultimately, like Brian said, it's all about increasing employment, right? And we have learned from the workforce systems across the country that state-level engagement with a diversity of partners. So that means leadership from your boards, vocational rehabilitation leadership, WIOA Core Partners, other partners in your state unified plan, equal opportunity officers, policy administrators, DEI, and other. If you don't have a DEI project, I'm sure you have other disability-related initiatives in your state, and have you engaged them? And really key partners across the spectrum of disability, like your independent living centers, your centers for blind and also deaf. And we've really learned these past several years of this focus on this work that it takes this kind of diversity of partners, of programs, of roles, perspectives, experiences to put their heads together and take action to improve equal opportunity, non-discrimination, and accessibility. And so here are some of those action steps that are being taken right now, and we'll hear more about that in part 2. But they involve, creating those definitions and standards, policies across the core programs. So there's a standard for physical programmatic access and effective communication. There's an interactive process in place for reasonable accommodations. There are procedures around Section 188, and those are part of the AJC certification. Developing and implementing cross-partner strategies to assess AJC training needs around 188 and accessibility. And then identifying cross-partner roles. This is kind of another area that we've seen a real positive change in, where there's cross-partner committees, but there are roles being clarified on those committees on offering support and technical assistance and monitoring for AJCs to continuously improve and look at compliance and accessibilities. And as we kind of come towards the end of the webinar, I wanted to relay a quote from the Virginia WIOA policy administrator in our work together. And as we kind of move to part 2 in another couple weeks, and she said, WIOA Section 188, when combined with one-stop certification, presents an unprecedented opportunity that the 4 titles are choosing to leverage by leaning forward together. The value add of engagement is paying off as other partners become more engaged in disability discussions. And Virginia has started a conversation which sets the stage for a much deeper dive than just completing a checklist for compliance. So with that, Brian, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. And, this builds on what our colleague from Virginia said quite nicely. Here's some questions for you to reflect on and consider as you process what we covered today, and look forward to what we'll be presenting in the part 2, which we're going to highlight a little bit more in the next slide. But here's some questions for you. Who's leading your state AJC certification processes? Is the EOO and VR involved in this certification process? Are state or local cross systems with varied disability and community partners involved in the process? Has your state surveyed AJC managers, staff, and customers, and of course partners, on Section 188 and accessibility? Has your state provided any training on Section 188? Do you know who will monitor your state's continuous improvement plans and provide technical assistance on compliance issues? So don't answer those now. Just keep thinking about them, and hopefully you'll get some more answers in the next section of our training, Part 2, which is what I'm talking about here. Okay, Part 2 is about examples from the field. These are states that we feel are developing and implementing particularly effective AJC certification processes. And we won't just explain them to you. We're bringing the actual folks responsible for these strategies from the states where they work to our WebEx platform to explain how and why they did what they did. Please don't miss it. Okay, Jamie, before we can go, you should probably mention the Section 188 reference guide.
Yes, absolutely. Can you just switch the slide? Thank you. So if you don't have a disability employment initiative, or maybe you lost your disability program navigator initiative, I always hear people talk about that, we have an incredible resource that lists just numerous really great promising practices in all of the areas that Section 188 mandates, and it's called the Promising Practices in Achieving Universal Access and Equal Opportunity, a Section 188 Disability Reference Guide. It was jointly developed by the Civil Rights Center, ETA, ODEP, with support from LEAD. And it's meant to assist American Job Centers by providing promising practices that correlate with specific non-discrimination requirements in Section 188 and the current regulations. And really, any partner or program could look at it and really learn a lot from it. And it's broken down into different sections in terms of universal access, equal opportunity, and it also contains language from the 188 regs that form the basis of the promising practices. So please do check it out. We're in the process of updating it as well and adding new practices. So with that, I think there's one more slide on it. It does not create new legal requirements. It does not preclude states from devising alternative approaches, but if you do create another approach, let us know because we'd like to add it. And adoption of the promising practices does not guarantee compliance. With that, I think I'll turn it over back to you, Laura.
Great. Thank you, Jamie and Brian. I again want to reflect on the title of this series, American Job Center Certification and Section 188. What you're really learning about is, as the title says, a window of opportunity to impact equal opportunity, policy, and practice for people with disabilities. Really want to thank Jamie and Brian today. Again, a great collaboration between two technical assistance centers who had the opportunity to work at the national level, but also to work within the field. And what Jamie and Brian are bringing today, and through Part 1 and Part 2 and Part 3, are really kind of what they're seeing, the need to help you. So we do not have time for question and answers today. We did receive some great questions and believe, please join us for Part 2 and Part 3. I believe many of those questions will be answered. You have the opportunity to download the webinar. There is also a link in the chat or Q&A box. This is the date for Part 2 and Part 3. And we also included in this PowerPoint, when you download it, some resources from both the LEAD Center and the DEI, the website, and some specific sections within the website that will be very helpful to you. And here's from Connect with the DEI. For those of you not familiar with it, please do check it out. On Workforce GPS, we also have a Disability and Employment Community of Practice, which is really developed for professionals like yourself, for AJCs, for the employer, and individuals with disabilities. So next steps, here's the link. Please join us on March 21st, where we'll learn more about state workforce systems that are making equal opportunity a priority. And as Brian and Jamie both said, we're going to hear directly from the people who are doing the work. So again, really want to thank all of you for spending your afternoon with us. Please take a moment to fill out the post-webinar survey, and we look forward to joining you again on March 21st. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you need to get a copy of the question.